This segment is about applying some of these things more specifically to the usual curriculum ideas that are produced or generated in school. It's the chapter from Education for Life is Humanizing the Process, Chapter 8. So in this chapter, Mr. Walters is telling a story about how you can actually use history in this case. You can also look at the other disciplines, but in this case history, to integrate it into the basic principles of why Education for Life is important. He's telling a story of a battle that took place in Switzerland many years ago. The peasants were being oppressed by the aristocracy and had started to rebel, but the aristocracy was about to crush them, and they knew what was going to happen. They knew that the next day that all these huge horses would be coming up with the infantry or the cavalry, and they didn't have any defense against it. They were just peasants. All they had was sticks and farm implements. But somebody had the idea that it was winter time, and they had the idea of flooding the field that the horses would have to come across. And then during the night, the water turned to ice. So when the charge happened the next morning, as everyone was expecting, the horses couldn't function on the ice. They started slipping and falling. And the peasants were all dressed up, ready for this, to be able to maneuver around on the ice, and they were able to actually win the battle. I think they were able to vanquish the aristocrats there. And so he's saying, well, how can you use that? Why would you want to tell that story? He says, what practical lessons might a child learn from these and other similar examples in history? Well, for one thing, he could be taught that solutions to problems often depend on being solution-oriented rather than problem-oriented. That opposite cases, in other words, history's outstanding failures, often resulted when people brooded on the hopelessness of their situation, instead of casting about expectantly for a way out of it. So it's an example of why you might want to study history. So when I was taking that into account in creating lessons for the high school students, in the United States, one of the required courses is obviously U.S. history. And it can be taught in extremely boring ways. That was my experience actually in school. My class was about memorizing dates and generals and battles, and had no interest in any of it. And it made absolutely no impact on me, except to me not to like history. So I know I didn't want to do it that way. And then I realized that United States history actually can be a wonderful course, because if you look at it, the history of the United States is all about trying to manifest human rights. It started with the whole idea of democracy and people voting for their own leaders, went through the whole history of getting rid of slavery in the United States. And it was not pretty all the time. There were a lot of mistakes made, but you can just see this momentum moving through. So when we looked at the curriculum we just rechanged everything. We took out all the dates and generals and battles that really didn't have any impact on the children's lives or any useful lessons. And we looked at people like Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a slave who escaped and then took a very strong role in helping people understand why slavery was so bad. And there was another one. There was a woman named Angelina Grimke, who was one of my heroines of history. She was born in the southern part of the United States where there was slavery. In fact, she was born into a household that owned many slaves, and her parents were staunch supporters of slavery, but she grew up as a sensitive child, and she just did not appreciate this whole idea of subjugating other human beings, and started to speak out when she was a teenager. And then gradually she was ostracized to the point where she had to leave. She had to leave the city, and she went up to the north, but she continued talking about how bad slavery was, and did a lot to help change people's minds. So another part of this struggle for human rights was getting the women's right to vote, which didn't happen until about 1919. So one of the people that was a strong early supporter of this was a woman named Susan B. Anthony. And she was very much, met much difficulties, much resistance, because here was a woman speaking up in the 1800s. And women weren't supposed to do that. They were supposed to be submissive and follow along with what the men said. But she didn't believe in that. But she did stand up for it. And in her lifetime, it didn't happen. But she did set the foundation that other people built on, so that eventually that did happen. So it's a wonderful, inspiring way to see these heroes and heroines, people who put their lives forth to further this very worthy goal of equality and freedom. So it's a powerful lesson that the children can tune into in their own lives. Like right now, of course, they're facing the climate crisis. And every generation has its own crisis to deal with. The question is, how do you respond? Do you go hide in the corner and just, oh my gosh, the whole world's coming to an end? Or do you figure out, well, maybe it is coming to an end, but at least I'm gonna put out energy and try to solve the problem, whether it was slavery or women's vote or now climate change. And then it's important to take it the next step, not to just leave it on a level of studying, but actually to get them involved in seeing that they can make a change for the better. So starting by the age of 12 is really a good time to get this in place, where you get them involved in making changes or helping in other ways. So we do this in our school. You can do it a little earlier than that. In some ways, you can do it really young, actually. If you're taking care of animals or something, you can start with little tiny kids. But so we look for these projects of how can we serve. So when I first started this, I went to our nearby town and asked people, could some of my teenagers come in and help you? And pretty much unanimously, the response was, no way. One man even said, I have enough problems. Why would I want to have teenagers here? And so I kept looking. And finally, we found somebody who was desperate enough to let us in. They were running an Alzheimer's daycare center. And there were a lot of people with Alzheimer's, and there were very few adults that were willing to work with them, because they're difficult people to work with. And so this man said, yes, we can use anybody. You bring your people in. I was working with the girls at this point. And so we went in, and I was kind of, well, I don't know what's going to happen here, and I'm not sure how I'll do in this situation. But the girls went in, and they seamlessly, they just walked up to the people, started talking to them. There was some music. A couple of them started dancing with the people and playing games. They had fun, because afterward I'd say, what game did you play? They say, well, we played this very simple game, but we had to re-explain the directions every time we went around the circle, because people couldn't remember the rules of the game. But they were just great at it, and they did make a big difference. In fact, we got an award that year from the county, the local government, for the good work that they had done in that project. But it doesn't have to be even on that level. Just so that they see that if they put out energy, they can help somebody, something, some situation. And this is crucial for teenagers, because if they don't get that, they can get very cynical, because they're becoming aware of the problems in life. That's why it's so important in this period, just as their minds are expanding beyond just the play area of a child to understand how the world works a little bit, and you start to see these really serious problems that we're facing, and it can just basically close you down. But what I've seen over and over again is, if they have an opportunity, from their own experience, they've seen that if they put out energy, they were able to change some situation for the better. They don't get cynical. They keep that as what in the book, what he called solution oriented. Problems, yeah, there are problems, but we're not going to be defined by our problems. Problems are just a stimulus to look for a solution.